This is Jeff Harry with Rediscover Your Play. I help people tap back into their inner child using play, as well as I have hard conversations and interviews about play. And today is a super exciting conversation with Humaira Hamid. And the best way in which to describe Humaira is the workshops that she runs are some of the most impactful and at an experiential level, like really tap into your soul type workshops where she can use like song, where she can use chants, where she can like ask really poignant questions that cut through all the BS and gets to like the root cause of the issue. And I also introduce her as the white person whisperer, which I came up with that term, and I don't know if she likes that term, but that is the coined term that I've come up with. So I'd just like to introduce you to the amazing Humaira Hamid.
Jeff Harry, you are such a special human. I so appreciate and adore you. I will add to that a couple of things. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name's Humaira. I am in my home in so-called known Penticton, BC, the unceded stolen territories of the Okanagan people, particularly the Silk Nation. As I was hearing Jeff, before we started recording, I was like, I'm just gonna let you introduce me. Don't tell me what you're gonna say, just do it. And as I was hearing you, I was like, that person sounds great. I want to meet her. So she, her, hers are my pronouns. This term, white person whisperer, that came up in a conversation that we had late last week, I was like, oh dang, a part of me, yes, I think so. And the words, I think, are so divisive in like today's climate and culture and whatever it is. Because I would say I'm a recovering coconut, where I look brown on the inside. I was brought up the formative years of my life in the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia, in Canada, and I really internalized whiteness a fair bit, quote unquote. And so when people are like, "Oh, you're not like other brown girls," or like, "You're so eloquent, you're so articulate," I'm like, "Thanks. I've dedicated my entire life. This is what I'm curious about and passionate about," and I can't help but also hear that with the tinge and the layer of like, oh, you're really eloquent and articulate and well spoken, like similar to the "where are you really from," what that question holds. And not always intentional, right? Some people are actually just giving me a genuine, sincere compliment, and I'm the one that layers on, for better and for worse, and kind of like closes that compliment from getting into my heart. And so all of those words to say, this white person whisperer thing, I've been the quote white person or the position in the climate that's emerged since the execution of George Floyd on the streets, caught on video, and Breonna Taylor's murder in her home as she was sleeping, where I've lost track of the days, to be honest, but many people seem to have forgotten. And you and I have had this conversation before. The first few weeks that everything kind of erupted, I realized how much of what I was putting out, how much of what I was thinking about, what was keeping me up at night and getting my like physiology kicked up and my heart racing, was, okay, people are listening or supposedly ready for this conversation now, where for years, friends, colleagues, people that I considered my chosen family, in different ways, like there was always this kind of separation, and now people are posting a black grid or whatever it is. And I noticed this urgency of like, okay, now you're ready for this conversation that I didn't ever quite know how to bring up because it steals focus or it's not the point in a professional meeting or whatever it is. And I got myself all rolled up in a tizzy trying to take care of other people in their learning, and the rug being pulled out from them, and how disorienting that is. I know how that feels. And I'm like, listen, don't get overwhelmed and drop out. My heart can't afford seeing you drop out. because it's going to break my heart. And so here I am, like, having my own rage and pain and confusion and trying to you know, have chats and conversations with beloveds on like voice messages and, you know, phone calls and video calls, because we are also in the backdrop of COVID-19 is still very much a reality, more for some people than others. And it brings up, if anybody's watched the movie Parasite, it's, you know, the one thing that happens and you're like, oh, it's such a, your interpretation based on your position is very different. And just being a part of so many conversations, and certain people are being much more careful, i.e. full of care, than I am. And then I feel like I'm being, you know, called out, called in. I'm like, oh, I think I'm a good person. Like, what am I doing though to reflect that belief in my behavior? Because intent, what does intent do if I end up impacting somebody's life in a harmful way that I could help? So
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say all that to say, I have a, for better and for worse, my burden that I carry sometimes happily is understanding both sides of it and being like, I literally right now, you are hurting me, or I am feeling hurt by what I'm hearing from you, what feeling from you, what my gut and my instinct and my body's kind of telling me. And like, if the words don't fit the picture, and I can also empathize with you. So like, I just want to be pissed off and like vilify you. But I can't quite do that. But then with some people, it just like, they become my full target for all of that rage, which is not fair. And here I am. So white person whisperer,
one of the reasons why I referred to you as the white person whisperer, which is a compliment, by the way.
I appreciate it.
Because almost like you're almost like the mediator is what I think you do in a magical way, and I use the word magical on purpose, is your ability to explain the rage and the complexity of anti-racism and everything that's behind that in a way that is not watered down to someone that identifies as Caucasian. And a lot of times I notice people feel like they have to water it down by changing the words like white supremacy to white privilege, or white supremacy to white fragility. Like they all, you know, you're always trying to do it in a really like careful sort of way. And you're like, no, let me drop it, and I will drop it in a deep way. But I'm also going to do it in a way that is respectful and not insulting to you. But I'm not going to water it down. I'm not going to change it. So I guess my question is like, what is it like to translate anti-racism to white folk?
Thank you. First of all, I'm like, oh, I do that. Okay, it doesn't feel like it to me. I do feel like I still edit and soften the edges and whatever it is, and take so much solace and modeling and admiration from people who do tell it like it is. Like Kimberly, what is her last name? Yes. Whose video, you know, she was straight.
You broke the contract. Yes, exactly. That's such an amazing video. I'll put it in this video in here.
Yeah, and she, you know, I saw that and I was like, bless you, sister, because I still feel like I'm like quivering and not actually being truth to power in that direct kind of way. And that's not who I am. And so it's not, I'm also not trying to emulate who she is. I'm just really grateful that that's out there. The reason that I think I can do it is because I will not position myself as an expert in anti-racism by any means. And the language getting in the way of what we're actually trying to do, like two people are trying to connect and instead it's going this way and that way and whatever it is, because we don't have common definitions for language. And one person says a term, like I say white, and people immediately, if you're a person who's white presenting, whether or not you're of quote unquote white, whatever that means, right? The social constructs that James Baldwin has extensively broken down and talked about, all of the erasure that goes into being called black or brown or white, and the complexities that exist in those cultures and those backgrounds. But in what I know to speak to is supremacy. And that is what I mean to say when I say that word is power over that is dominating, oppressive, pushes down, the punch down instead of punch up. Like there's all of these different terms out there. But the thing that that I know that you and Angie Cole spoke, and we were talking about white lady and women in a gendered social construct experience around the world. When she was talking about some of those concepts of the white lady, perfectionism, like be quiet, look pretty, show up, or whatever it is, that is embedded in South Asian culture and how to be a good brown woman. And so we understand in our own lives and in our own ways what it feels like to be pushed down, to be made small, to be quieted down, or whatever it is. And right now, the specific power dynamic that we're talking about is the one that has come to be this way over generations on the North American continent specifically, which is very different than the European continent, which is very different from the African continent, of a power inequality and people being so dissociated from like the parentheses being around like me and my life as like I am the epic, I am the book, I am the like Lord of the Rings trilogy or whatever. My life, I'm the captain of my own ship, as compared to the view of I am a sentence in a paragraph in a chapter of a very long book, that like every single thing that you do with your life still matters, because without that sentence, the story doesn't make sense. And the story is forever altered. And like, what does it look like to zoom out and also look at ourselves in the context of where we are born into, whether by choice, by circumstance, it wasn't my fault, why is it now my responsibility? That's born from a competency and a characteristic that we as a collective community don't have.
Right.
Because it's like you're responsible for what you do, and what your sister does is her responsibility, and what your other sibling does is their responsibility, or whatever it is. And it's like, yes, and like, what's the family constellation? What's the neighborhood context? What's the municipal or the state context, or whatever it is, right? I'll tend to use municipal, provincial, and national because I'm in Canada, which is not applicable language for the states as much. But I think I was going somewhere with this and I lost the tail.
Well, so one thing that you brought up that I thought is really interesting is the idea of supremacy power, right? And I think of the book Power Map, which I just got. My friend Tashawn recommended to me, where the theory in the book, or one of the theories in the book, is that every interaction we have, whether it's conscious or subconscious, you either are choosing to be in a position of power or choosing to be in a position of powerlessness. And then if you choose to be in a position of power, whether you realize it or not, you are either choosing to have supremacy power, which is what you said earlier. It's just like, it's dominant. It's all about submission. It's all about winning. It's all about that there only can be one leader, and then the other type of power, which would be like liberatory power, which is very egalitarian. It's where like, instead of a pedestal where one person's on, it's a platform, and you can put a lot of people on the platform together. And it really does make me wonder, like, how can people even recognize when they are stepping into their supremacist power?
That's a really good question. It's a beautiful question, actually. And the ways that I catch myself, this is very lived experience only, is if I'm going from that smug place, then it's probably a supremacist over liberatory power. Like if I feel like this slick, smug, I'm better than you, why don't you know this, why can't you catch up, which is like valid for some people's experiences. Like the reason, why do young kids become bullies on the playground? You're like looking to siphon off some sort of pain or pressure or unexpressed something else in a particular channel. And so if I notice myself coming from like that place, as compared to feeling more like an auntie or a grandmother or a cousin, like how would I do it for the people who, like, even if they did wrong and I'm in pain right now, and like now I got to do more work, and like all the mums and dads and uncles and aunties and parents and guardians and grandmothers and grandfathers know this, in that way, right? Anybody who's an elder sibling and is guarding, you're like, even if you messed up, you know, that I think that's the liberatory power, and there's a lot of grace in it and a lot of patience, and divine Lord knows I don't have all that all the time. So that's how I try to catch myself in it. And like if I'm in my righteous pain though and my righteous rage, oh, I'm mean. My partner knows this. I bless him.
Wait, so talk also about entitlement, especially when it comes to the Ibram Kendi talk from yesterday
Oh,
that people had trouble getting on.
right. So I haven't watched it yet, and I haven't read his work yet, and I've listened to a bunch of his videos. And the Prince George County Library Systems, I believe, was the organization that was hosting Dr. I forget the other guest's name, but it was in conversation, and I understand she was a very excellent moderator and brought some really insightful questions. And then Ibram Kendi was speaking to what he's dedicated his life to studying. And you sent me a text like, hey, were you able to get on the call? And I was like, oh, nuts. I completely spaced on it. Let me try and hop on now. And I go onto the Facebook page and see all the comments 2 minutes in, 8 minutes in, 13 minutes in. People were like, the link's not working. So they had emailed out a link to all people who registered, and multiple comments that are like, it's too bad you have 77,000 people waiting on a dead link right now, or now 80,000 people. It's a real missed opportunity. And it's like 18 minutes in and now there's 23,000 people. And I was like, hang on a minute. You were delivered this like world-class thought leadership dialogue between two brilliant people who have dedicated their lives in different ways to this study. It's coming to you free on multiple platforms of your choice. You can watch it on Facebook, on YouTube, or whatever it is. And you get a link that doesn't work for 8 minutes, and now you're getting huffed up about how I was like, God, I understand that people are under pressure in their lives, which is, again, where I switch back and forth from like, give it a freaking rest, and like, I empathize with you deeply because this happens to me too. Like if you had arranged for childcare, or if you like eked out the only time for your sanity to now dedicate yourself to this hard learning, and now the link isn't working, like, is it professional? Is it whatever? Like, life happens, shit happens. It's still, you know, in the middle of a pandemic, and it's this organization providing this gift to you, and you're like, you didn't show up to the party in time, and you said you'd bring me a gift, and I'm like waiting for my gift right now.
Ooh, but then that also, you mentioned one thing about time. Tell me more about this tell me more about this I know POC time, but for people that don't understand POC time, can you explain it, but in the context of like some of it, of the larger discussion around it, and what POC time means to us in comparison to someone that doesn't understand POC time?
Right. So I will speak to this, A, from lived experience, and B, from, I used to teach ethics and professional communication at a college for a number of years. And one of the things was looking at different cultures, and culture can just be like the culture of Penticton, right? It can be the culture of my household. But culture as it pertains to supposedly more like Eurocentric, if you think about the Germans, the Swiss, the whatever, like time precision is upheld as this like pristine, excellent thing, which it is. Like the world as it operates today would not if we didn't have that social contract. And anytime somebody breaks the social contract because they hang back on more relational time, which is what people call like Indian time or POC time, like I'll locate myself as a Bengali Indian heritage, my parents and my family lineage, that's where that's from. I'm still uncovering it. And so I feel like an orphan of culture, similar to a lot of white people. It's like, what does that white mean? And now you're talking about me being punctual as a white culture and that being a bad thing. But this whole thing of like, if I'm chronically late, and I have bought so many of the self-development books, and like I used to be in business development and all this stuff, like time is money, you know, like time is very important. And I really struggled with being myself and that being couched in POC time, like you and I are not the same kind of brown, but we understand what POC time or like Indian time or island time or whatever it's called. It's that like there are certain things that are more important than showing up at 10 a.m. on the dot, Pacific Standard Time. Give or take a little while, and that the understanding and the grace is there because other things then haven't been placed on top of that being a foundation in the way, but like I would get reprimanded at work because it's unprofessional for me to, show up late or be in. So when I taught professionalism, I was very much in what's the word I'm looking for? Not indoctrinating. That seems really harsh, but maybe. But passing forward, like this is how you be a professional, and how you be a professional is like I would straighten my hair before I talk. And I would feel a lot more put together and a lot whatever it is. And then I was like, wait, where did that come from? Like if I was speaking up on a stage in front of hundreds of people, I'd be like, if I didn't get my eyeliner on and if I didn't straighten my hair, somehow I didn't feel like I was put together.
Right.
And those are the things that I've been questioning over the last few years of like, if I have this expertise, but I show up with, wavy hair, like it's a little frizzy or whatever it is. And like, oh, you look a little disheveled. Where did that look being disheveled come from? Right? Like, how did things come to be this way? And these tiny symptoms that are so innocuous now, and people are like, really, you're going to make this about race too? And it's like, yeah, because it is. And none of us were given this story. And so it seems like a real reach when you bring it up at a party, or at the bar or like at the park or whatever it is. Well, like, can you not make everything political?
Yeah, I think there's what I hear in the disheveled or I need to have straightened hair, or I need to show up like as a professional, right? As a professional, is this idea of right and wrong, which then is like, well, who's defining what is right and what is wrong? Who are the people that are pushing the levers of power of like, this is what it means to dress professionally, this what it means to show up professionally. Yeah. And I think of POC time because, my mom's from the Philippines and there's Filipino time, and then my dad's from St. Vincent, Caribbean time. And even though drastically different parts of the world fully understand each other, because I think about it and I'm like, it's just not that big of a deal if you roll in half an hour to an hour late. It's just not. And it's like, well, it's just like, well, we're just going to wait till there's a critical mass of people, which is much more of a different and more organic. And I don't know if you could refer it as tribal, but like, it's definitely a more organic way of having people come together.
Right.
It's a much more natural, chill vibe. I think of like my cousins in St. Vincent that are like, yeah, we lime all day. And liming is literally chilling and drinking. And then we lime here, then we lime at the beach, then we lime at a bar, and then we lime at somebody's house. So it's like, there's not this rush to be like, well, what time does liming start?
Quick, we got a lime. We have put the timer on, light your candle.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, have we connected enough? Do we have to, and I even think about like culturally how in the Caribbean and the at least in Filipino culture is, we'll just chill for hours of just hanging out. While when I'm hanging out at a party that is predominantly white, people are like, I gotta get back to my dog. I gotta get home to sleep. And it's just like, there's so much more anxiety that I feel, so that you, there's so much more worry. And I'm like, why is this so uptight? Just even thinking about the two different types of weddings, POC weddings and label weddings, like POC weddings might go 2 days, 3 days. They go late into the night. They break the law sometimes by going past 2 or 3 a.m. and someone has to shut it down, and I know when a white wedding is ending because they sing Sweet Caroline, everybody sings it together, and then they go home, and it's like 11 or midnight. And I'm like,
or Don't Stop Believing,
Don't Stop Believing. Like,
I know it. And so you bring up a couple of really good things. One, you mentioned weddings as an example, and there's so much like layer and texture. And lest I go off on my 3-hour chat with you, I'm just gonna put that one down for now. But when I heard you say, this like all this anxiety around time, I am guilty. So the reason you call me the white person whisperer is I know how to be white. When I get on the phone, I can speak white. I can code
Mm-hmm.
switch,
Yeah.
right? And I do that in my body. I do that in how I breathe. I do that in how I carry myself in ways that I don't even notice anymore. And I am guilty of being that like anxious, like, hey, are we connecting? Hey, are we? And bless their hearts, both of my sisters have endured my internalized whiteness for so long because we all live in different dwellings, and did when we were all in Metro Vancouver. One of them lives in Vancouver proper, one of them lives in Surrey, which are the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people. Vancouver is. And I'd be like, I can get together at 3:30 and I have until 4:45 before I need to like go somewhere else, and so I'm in this rush and this anxiety of like
Mm-hmm.
getting to my sister's place, and she's living her life, and I'm like, hey, so can we talk? Like, can we connect deeply? Because I was so anxious and I was so afraid of us drifting apart and all of the things that I was trying to do in my life. I'm like, I can't build a thriving career in the entrepreneurial sense, or like show up and do and be what I need to, and also be, I don't know what the equivalent term in Bangladesh is, if there's any, but like she's living more of a liming life,
Mm.
in that kind of way. Like it's less urgent, it's less hurried, and she's loving it. And I, through my like lens of whiteness, because I was operating in predominantly spaces that were run through the lens of whiteness, and I call that now not to indicate like amount of melanin in everybody's skin, because I drove whiteness in spaces, and folks who otherwise aren't like Caucasian, which apparently I learned recently is an inaccurate term too. And I was like, well, this rabbit hole just keeps, the more you uncover, the more you
Right.
realize you're uncovering.
Wait,
But that's a lot.
and can you talk more about code switching? What exactly that is? How do you interpret it? And then also how much energy you need to put into code switch?
Oh God. My personal experience of it, so I don't know who to attribute that to. I need to do more research, because I know somebody has coined the term and like expanded on it. But in brief, like the way that I behaved when I was visiting my mother's home, very different from how I was interacting at a networking event.
Mm-hmm.
And I know how to be in both. I know how to pass in both. I know how to chameleon. And
Yep.
so it's that constant work of switching, um, under what code am I operating? What's funny? What's the lingo? What do you say? What do you not say? How do you, do you behave more passively, as it's described in a lot of kind of like North American culture, or do you behave more assertively? And then most of the like white presenting spaces that I was in was around entrepreneurship, small business, self-development, personal development, growth, and a lot of the wellness spaces in the Pacific Northwest, which I don't care the amount of melanin on somebody's skin. If you're in mainstream spaces, in the studios and in the things that get a lot of hype, you are likely performing under whiteness.
Mm-hmm.
That culture that we all know, that I know, being brought up here. And code switching, I also have a number of other things. I'm rereading Dr. Gabor Mate's Scattered Minds, which speaks to the experience of ADD or ADHD. And I don't identify as somebody that has that experience. I've never gotten diagnosed with those signs. And I hear a lot of my story in some of the ways that manifests for people. It could be very volume turned up to 11 for somebody else, and mine's maybe at a 5 or a 6. But this exhaustion that comes from wanting to do too much and like eat everything at the buffet, I was in that hamster wheel and took on too much, and had an experience of physiological and neurological burnout,
Mm.
which is a part of the reason why I now live where I do, because I physically needed to remove myself. I was unable to engage in other ways of staying in that space and being there. And I share this because I wonder how much longer I would have lasted if some of my energy wasn't being siphoned off by code switching every day. I may have lasted 2, 3, 5, 8 more years. Who knows?
Wow.
I don't know, right? I could have hit the ball at the exact same date that I did this, this round. But it's, I was chatting with a mutual friend of ours who was at the conference that we connected more deeply at in Portland last fall, which seems like years ago. And he was talking about like, does it kind of feel like the whole notion of like death by 1,000 cuts? And it's like, kind of, and people are like, well, you're not bleeding out, you're not hemorrhaging, you haven't lost a limb. And, I have no idea the experience of not being in the body that I'm in. So I'm not going to speak anything more or less. I don't know, so I can't speak to it. Basically, I'm repositioning myself as a non-expert. But I was like, it still takes your body energy, right? Like when you get a bug bite, if you get a cut or whatever it is, and when people are looking to, the like quantified self, optimal, wake up and you do your bullet journal and you do your bulletproof coffee and you get your tech to wake you up slowly.
You put your bulletproof suit on and
8.9 second time frame and whatever. Like obviously this is poking at it now, but that notion of like if you're not at your optimal self because there's little ways that your energy is constantly being sucked out of you, then you're never going to be able to put your full self into what you choose. And boohoo, that's the story of a lot of people's lives, right? Like our commitments and our surroundings and our context demand a certain thing from us. And I think what a lot of people are asking for is like, A, can we not pretend this doesn't exist anymore? Because it does. And that additional gaslighting of like, oh, I've been code switching all this time and it doesn't exist in the conversation. And until the term code switching was termed, like we didn't have shared language,
right.
POC time, island time. It's different in Pinoy culture than it is in Bengali culture. And it's similar in certain ways. And I will aside to say, as an event planner, mortifying, so annoying. And it's not necessarily white culture in that sense, but my profession was putting events together. And if people rolled in an hour late and the event was 2 hours, and it's like, who are you going to get? It was a fundraising event or whatever it is. And so you have the intros, you have the remarks, you have the building of a container and an experience that can only happen when everyone's together.
Yeah.
And the urgency and the anxiety and the control comes in when you don't have 8 hours for every, if you have 8 hours, probably within an hour, everyone's there and it can contain that shared community experience. If you're truncating that down to 2 hours, you need everybody to be there in that like 22-minute window. That's very generous, probably more like 11-minute window, right, or whatever it is. So that's where the anxiety gets amped up. It's like, you're not running a community, run for a cause. You're in a marathon right now, or like you're at the Olympics or whatever it is. It's just the
precision,
the pressure and the precision needs to go up. And so you have exquisite, like Swiss timing, and you have exquisite all of these things, because in this context, that is exquisite. I get a thrill out of, certain things that are quote unquote white culture. And I don't think anyone's saying these are terrible, get them out of here, let's never do it again. The conversation, I believe what it's trying to get to is like, this has gone way out of the frame right now into absolute toxicity, where it's only working for a very small fraction of people and everyone else is having to conform to this. And there's a very real economic, social, psychological, physiological, generational impact that people are having to carry. And anyone who talks about financial freedom or independence, like, you talk about saving and compound interest. And if you take that concept and put it into compound trauma for example, if something isn't being recognized, and what I've learned in my own reading, not an expert, is traumatic things can happen to us all the time, and they do. If we are in the presence of an empathetic witness, whether we can provide that to ourselves, or if we're not in a place because we're so occupied in making sure we're okay, that somebody else is able to be that empathetic witness for us. A guardian, mom or dad, auntie, cousin, sister, a friend, a stranger, or whatever it is. But if something happens and you are feeling hurt, or you're in pain, or whatever it is, and somebody's like, oh my God, are you okay? And just kind of like holding that container until you can pull yourself together and shake it off. Like if you trip over a sidewalk curb and have a pretty bad fall, and somebody from across the street sees you, you make eye contact and they walk by, that's a very different experience than if they stop from across the street and check in on you like, hey, are you okay? And you're like, yeah, I'm fine, I just need to gather myself. And then they walk off. And it's very different from them crossing the street, crouching down behind you and being like, hey, are you okay? And you're like, yeah, I'm fine. And be like, cool, I'm just gonna hang out until you get up. Right? And if you need a hand getting up, let me know. Like that is the social experience that people are pushing back right now. And there's so many different lived experiences of racism in North America. And you and I have talked at some length about like the fractured left, you know, and like many voices are trying to be heard at a time when any other voices are even being given the time of day and the attention.
Right.
And so when people who don't understand that experience, and we're calling that white folks, but it's folks who look like me who were never given the whole truth. You know, there's the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And people who don't know now are like, well, so I'm hearing this from this person and this from this person and this from this person. Like, what am I supposed to do as a good person? You know, because right now I'm also being defensive, and like, I think I'm a good moral person. I've done this all my life. And now this like wave, this tidal wave out of nowhere is coming in and saying like, you're terrible. Here's all the ways that you've been killing people. And you're like, I've been going to the PTA, like I volunteer on my neighborhood watch, like I've done everything that I possibly know how to do to be a good person. And now you're saying that everything I do is wrong.
Right.
And to Angie Colinier's conversation, if you're a white lady who all you know for affirmation, safety, care, connection is based on you performing well, then you're in your own friggin' shame spiral or panic or whatever it is. And like, you know, through play, like panic is not where we do our best work.
Right. And it's interesting. Oh, there were so many points that came up for me when you were speaking, especially about the code switching, because even code switching the word is again watered down because it used to be called acting white, right? But if you said, oh, feel like sometimes I have to act white at work, that would viscerally affect people, right? And I think of like I think of POC time. And then what's fascinating, you mentioned about like FIRE, right? The financial like independent movement. And it's people that are wanting to get out of the game, to get out of like the white American capitalistic game. Or people are taking stuff that POCs created and are now recoining it as something that they've created, like the slow food movement. Whoa, what's the slow food movement? It's just people chilling and eating slowly, dude. We do that all the time, you know, or, you know, when people gravitated to yoga or meditation or all these other things that were like, that don't fit the capitalistic American model, which is always like rush, must produce, always produce. And then people are embracing it, but embracing it from like this sense of almost colonizing it and being like, wow, you know what? You know, marijuana is actually good for you. And it's like, really? We've been using it for a while and getting arrested for it.
And now we are going to create elevated brands that use THC and CBD and become entrepreneurs in this new frontier. Like this whole idea of when is it safe enough to be brave enough?
Mm-hmm.
And I this came to me through there's an organization in Vancouver called BWSS, the Battered Women's Support Services, and their tagline is "Safety changes everything."
Mm.
And when you have the safety of being white presenting and the assumptions that not all white folks get away with murder, right? Like there are real repercussions that happen for people, and disproportionately, like if I'm caught in public doing something that is technically illegal, if I didn't have the skills and the knowledge and the lived experience of growing up in North America that I did, if I were my mother, I would not have the same outcomes.
Right.
My mother would not have the same outcomes as me. I would not likely have the same outcomes as a woman who might present as white presenting with blonde hair, for example. And I have a lot of blonde people that I love dearly, right? Like it's not this, but it's like when people are like, oh, this indigenous entrepreneur has done this thing, or like this black female entrepreneur has run this company. Like, when was the last time that I said, oh, like, isn't this device or this gadget or this jewelry so great? I got it from this white woman entrepreneur. Like, it just, it throws some of those things at, in the face of like, oh, right, that's still a little off, isn't it? Like, we're trying, and recognize that we're like resting, and then we're gonna have to keep going, and that we don't get to be done.
Yes.
Because this is the like right thing or the good thing.
Yeah, and I guess there's the other part that is so frustrating to me, where like going back to the marijuana discussion is you've had, at least in America, millions of POC and predominantly Black and brown people, brown men,
Yep.
incarcerated for possession of marijuana. And then it gets legalized in Colorado, and then all of a sudden you have people that are white presenting on the cover of magazines being considered entrepreneurs of the year and becoming millionaires off the same thing that other kids went to jail for. And then in addition to, on top of not being able to benefit from this because now you're in jail or you're out of jail, because you have a felony record, you now can't vote. So you can't vote, other things are taken away from you, you can't get a job. So it's just like these.
Whereas the folks who are now entrepreneurs of the year on the covers of those magazines will possibly get invited to business roundtables that have direct impact and influence on policy,
Yep.
of tax structures, of the kinds of things that the government will incentivize or stimulate or whatever it is, right? Like, we have all the words, we have all the language.
Right.
And it's, I want to say one other thing in part before it leaves me, so it is feeling urgent, and sorry to interrupt you earlier. This whole notion of like, that's so white, this is what white people do. What was it? You had said something that had sparked this in me.
The acting white.
The acting white. And for me, in the wellness space, like, I've gravitated towards a lot of healing modalities that many other people have had, that I believe if we're orphans of culture and we're trying to find our way back to what sounds true, you go back to things that are pretty universal. If we go back far enough, regardless of where clan origins were across the globe, I think there were certain things that it's like, oh, you call that a dumpling, you call that a samosa, you call that a calzone, you call that a whatever. But like, we kind of converge, and this is evolutionary. There's oh shoot, my university professors will be so upset that I lost the terms for this. But all that to say, there's like homologous and analogous evolution. I think those are what it is. I might look back on this now and be like, no, that was so wrong. But different things, like a whale's fin and a human hand, if you x-ray them, actually look very similar. And so does a bat's wing. And some of them are like, you came from the same branch and then you got different. And other things is like, you came from different branches and look the same. And so the how did things come to be this way, this question that comes with me, is in part a hangover from my scientific training through school, of like looking at things very rationally and really dissecting it. So I can also do that. And when I loved doing that, the majority of people that I had conversations with happened to be white dudes.
Mm.
They were the ones that were constantly in it in the same intensity, with the same curiosity that I was. And then I would go into wellness spaces, and it was predominantly white presenting women in yoga classes and meditation, in breath work now. And you talk about, I called it Columbusing, and I think somebody out there had actually termed it, and I didn't come up with it, but like we individually sparked on the same thing. And it's we're an orphan, we're grasping for things, we're panicking, maybe we're like Mr. Flight and are walking around being like, I don't know what I'm gonna do, I'm on my last dollar, and somebody's like, hey, you look really wrecked. If you want, you can come and, you know, take a beat, come over to my place, like have a meal. If you need a place to stay, you know, we can open up our space to you, or whatever it is. And the equivalent of being like, okay, cool, going into the space, and then like walking into the living space, sitting down on the couch if there is one, putting your feet up and being like, hey, could you order me some whatever. Like, there's this grace of, if we are orphans of something that we feel deeply connected to, and these other cultures, indigenous cultures specifically in Canada, I will say, that have resisted hundreds of years of extermination of culture and being and ways, and now people picking up a drum, and people wearing feathers, and people doing beadwork, or wearing headdresses at festivals and being like, why is it such a big deal? It's like, because it's a big deal. If you knew the histories of the compound effects that this carries with it, and what this is a symbol of, and you being on the cover of a glossy magazine while other people are experiencing incarceration, and what does that do to families when their parents are taken away, or the impact of majority of, you know, this, young Black boys, for example, being put into jails, and what does that do to the community when you no longer have those human beings doing what they're excited about, doing what they're passionate about, doing what could be their creative outlet, building families and communities, being uncles and brothers and cousins and grandfathers and all of that stuff. Like, there's such a poverty that comes from that. And it's just like, again, going back to the parentheses of like, we're in 2020 now. Like, 2000s are ancient. Do you remember when Google first came out? It was not that long ago. You know, but like the rate of acceleration is so fast, and I think it becomes more important than ever to anchor ourselves and root ourselves back into history, context, and culture, and understanding why something is done in a good way and something else that like seems kind of the same, and everybody's getting really heated about this. It's like, why don't you get curious about why this reaction is coming at you, instead of getting defensive about like, well, I didn't do anything wrong.
Well, so talking about reaction, is you had shared with me earlier from the National Museum of African American History and Culture, where they shared that what is it, that PDF on aspects and assumptions of whiteness, white culture in the United States. Can you talk about that, as well as the reactions that you saw to this?
So I just saw this yesterday in passing. I sought it out because my browser tab closed, and I was like, oh no, that was really good. And I was only halfway through it. So I spent a considerable amount of time seeking the source, and it ended up being that museum branch of the Smithsonian. And apparently it had been released 5 days ago.
Oh,
and
can you say what it was for anyone that doesn't know what it is?
the organization, or
No, just what was the document?
Oh, the document is an infographic that is titled Aspects and Assumptions of Whiteness and White Culture in the United States. That's the top of the image, and it says white dominant culture, or whiteness, in bold and italics, refers to the ways white people and their traditions, attitudes, and way of life have been normalized over time and are now considered standard practice in the United States.
Mm.
There's more context, and then there's all of these different categories. And the one that I brought up, because you and I were talking, was time. And it says, follow rigid time schedules, and time is viewed as a commodity. And the backlash that white Twitter had, and again, not white Twitter, right? Like, this was folks of all different visible backgrounds. But like me as the coconut, I'd be like, what? So now me wanting to be punctual because my career depends on it as an event planner is like white supremacy? Great. Like, what am I just supposed to like shut myself in my room and never interact with anybody again because I can do no freaking right ever? Like, I understand the defensiveness. Like, if somebody came after, and this has happened, when someone comes after what I consider my cultural food because I was brought up with it, and talking about how white rice is so unhealthy and have you tried quinoa instead, or like, do you want to cut grains out altogether? And I'm like, are you talking about my mom? Right now, like, we are attacking something that is so personal. So it's understandable, and I'm excited because I think it's an opportunity for the first time for a lot of people of having what is personal to you be put on blast.
Mm.
And I'm, put on blast is African American vernacular English. I'm not a Black person, right? I grew up in the 90s in North America. Like, I didn't have my culture, and so hip hop, alt rock, Friends, Simpsons, like, this is my culture. And so when you talk about white people whisperers, because I am one in a lot of ways, like, I have that part of my lived experience where I get the defensiveness and I get the like wanting to minimize something when it's like, now you're going to go after Friends. Like, Friends is sacred. And I had this conversation with
Friends. You can't touch Friends.
You can't touch Friends.
Don't touch Chandler.
And I had this conversation with two friends just the other day because I was like, looking back at Friends now, over the last 5 or 6 years of some intense education that I did, sought it out, gifted by other people endured my ignorance for long enough and loved me long enough so that I could learn through this stuff. I look back at Friends now and I'm like, oh, Friends is garbage. Like, there's so much stuff. There's unhealthy codependent relationship stuff in there. There's fat shaming and fat phobia. There's like love through critique, and like there's like, you don't talk about money, and like there's all of this toxic culture built in. There's like sex shaming and like slut shaming and like all of this stuff. I'm like, this show is garbage. And like, if I'm done, which I have felt multiple times throughout these past few months and the past few years, I'll go back to Simpsons references. I'll go back to watching a Friends episode in the background because that's speaking to my animal body, like my nostalgic self that needs this, listening to Neo or listening to R. Kelly. Like, those people did garbage things.
Mm-hmm.
And where does the conversation land on separating the person from the art? And cancel culture, I saw somebody share this recently. I have it flagged to learn more. Cancel culture as a second layer symptom of whiteness, for example, of like, if you don't do it perfectly, you're out.
Yeah.
And all of this like shaming and whatever it is. And how do you deal with that? Like, some people, it's not cancel culture if you're constantly being harmed and you're choosing your boundaries.
Yeah.
Right? You're just like, I'm just not going to buy from this company anymore. I'm not going to listen to this person anymore. And everyone else can consider, here are my reasons. But when people go like for vigilante justice, and I think that's what a lot of people are afraid of, is like, now you can't do anything right, and like, how am I supposed to pay my bills? It's still COVID, and like, if my company gets canceled right now, like, what am I gonna do?
Right.
So like, there's all of these, like, everything's just in a giant pile, and we're like dumping more into the garbage fire, and everyone's figuring it out the best they can.
Yes, I will say one thing though. When I hear people being like, or especially white people, when I hear them saying like, well, I can't do anything right. Like, what do you want me to do? Right? Because everything I do, I'll make a mistake. And I think there's two parts of the response that I usually say is, one is like, yes, you're going to make mistakes. That's just the reality of it. own that. It's going to be fine.
Yeah.
And second, and I think this is a more important part, is the idea of consistently showing up and then just not trying to lead, when you show up. It's just like, it's showing up to a Black Lives Matters protest and being like, what do y'all need? Like, I saw a group of moms, white women, older white women, make a line in front of cops in Portland the other day. And that's all they did. But it was big enough that then the cops weren't as violent because there was this group of moms in the front. But there's just this idea of like showing up and then consistently showing up and just simply listening and being like, what do you need? All right, I'll help however I can. Because usually what happens is either people start to show up a little bit and then try to take over,
Yes.
or they show up and then they realize they can't take over, so then they just stop showing up anymore. Yeah. And you can talk about like POC and liming and chilling. The more people of color see you hanging out and chilling and doing the work next to them over and over again, the more trust you build. And you can't build it by like all the stuff you read or all the things you've done or your resume. It's just like, I trust you when I see you in the trenches with me for a long period of time, not just once in a while in a very performative justice sort of way.
Yeah. As you said that, I was like, oh, it's the people are building their anti-racism resumes right now.
Yeah,
like that's how
they're doing their
I'm experiencing it. And you got to start somewhere, right? Like you build work experience when you first get into industry or whatever it is, and then eventually you find your discipline and your voice, and you learn enough of the rules to break the rules or whatever it is. Like we have models of what a learning arc looks like. Mm-hmm. And I think right now the panic is like, I'm so behind, or I was not awake to this, and now everyone's holding me to like major account.
Right.
And this was part of my ramble yesterday, the 2-hour and 15-minute recording that I did of I lost it. Shoot, what was I just saying?
Oh gosh. Oh my god.
The arc of learning of people being like, I'm a human being and I get to have grace, right? Mm-hmm. Like I'm just learning, I'm gonna make mistakes, and I make the differentiation between if you're an individual human being with a first and a last name and maybe middle names, which I don't have and I've always envied, you get all of the human grace, you get your time, you get your process. As soon as you have made yourself into a brand, as soon as you have made yourself into an institution, as an organization, then you hold the power of an institution, organization, association, collective, brand. And that responsibility and the power is not the same as the responsibility and power of an individual. So I think a lot of people are scrambling right now because if you built your livelihood as being a media influencer, for example, and you are your brand, you're now having to do the very gut-wrenching, heartbreaking, I was going to say humiliating, but I think it calls upon a lot of humility.
Yeah.
To be able to separate this and be like, me as a person, I am lovable, I am loved. All of the I'm hearing a lot of Brene Brown being quoted right now in this process from folks who are really struggling. And it's like, you as a human being, 1000% get that. We all get that respect, dignity, care, grace, and support, or, in an ideal world, we all would. And you have economic, social, psychological, other benefits that have come from creating yourself into a brand. And so your individual, like, I get to take my time to learn this right now, doesn't apply in the same way to this, right? You, the human being, yes. You, the brand or the organization, do better.
Yeah.
You hire consultants for marketing, you hire consultants for strategy, for growth, hire somebody to figure out your stuff, right? Go to therapy, go to group process, go to whatever it is that is a healing space for your individual self, and then figure out your business quick, because you are now just being held to account in a way that you just kept getting away with shitty things for a long time, and now you're being held to account. And it's personal for you. You need to learn how to do this.
And I think what also is interesting about that is there's also the commodifying of anti-racist education, right? Where all of a sudden, you're a white person that's educating themselves about racial equity and anti-racism, and then you've learned a certain amount, and then you're like, you know what, I can start teaching this, and then you start using it, and that's the criticism that a lot of people say about the book White Fragility. Is as soon as she wrote it, then she started making workshops, which are needed, to address white fragility, but it was also then a commodifying of it instead of being like, hey, there are institutions that are already doing this work,
Right.
that are run by people of color, run by strong Black women and men that have been doing this for decades. And
Mm-hmm.
instead of you creating your own thing so that it's much easier to get your following to participate and
Yeah.
you can make a quick buck from it, you either, you instead share and highlight these amazing people that have been doing this work for a really long time.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's where for better and for worse, some people are like, you're too soft and you should check your own internalized racism, and why are you defending the abusers and all of this stuff. And like, I'm constantly doing that work in myself. And as the like curse of the mediator, seeing both sides, I'm like, listen, if people are never going to go to this organization that's doing like profound work, and
Mm.
like this is the scale of experience that people need to go through before they can get here, start here. If you're Robin DiAngelo or you're whoever, you have a position that will be able to engage an audience that won't go here.
Right.
That there's a part that you play there. Just don't make yourself the destination.
Right.
Like, put the like vest on, get the like airplane fingers on, and be like, great, like. And if people aren't going to if their bodies are not going to move through you to the next thing, then you better make sure that you're siphoning the resources and the fame and the name and the power and the influence that you're getting. And it doesn't have to be public necessarily. I don't know what Robin DiAngelo does with the profits. Like, I want to see a balance sheet. I want to see where the investments from the company are going
Mm.
from. What is that then going and getting invested into? Because if that work is visibly and not so visibly doing the actual work on an individual and on a interpersonal and on an institutional level, then yeah, some people are going to be, I'm pissed off that some people will listen to what I have to say through the mouth of a person who looks different than me.
Mm.
When I've lived it and she just woke up to it 2 years ago.
Right.
And if she and I are able to have a relationship, and a true relationship, not like a guilt savior complex thing, but like, listen, I get that people are going to listen to me and not to you. Let me do these things, and then let's you and I work on other things that are also helpful, because I think white folks need spaces to figure out their guilt. And I in a healing space for me, I don't need to be around that. So like, we each do our like caucusing kind of work, and then we come together when we've done certain things, and certain things can only be done together. But
So, so in our last 7 minutes, as time is a thing,
Are you
what?
being white right now, Jeff?
Yes, what is it about anti-racist work, as you see, that you believe white people or white presenting people currently don't get?
This is a symptom, not a root cause. Like, if you want to understand this whole anti-racism and race in North America conversation that's very, very loud, perhaps to you for the first time, when it's been very loud to people for their entire lives, it's about power. Look back at like where funding goes to. If you follow the money, you understand people's motivation. And so if people are doing something that doesn't make sense to you, look to the core motivators. And when you had talked about, supremacist power and liberatory power, it's this idea of racism and race relations and dynamics is about power.
Mm.
The conversation around gender is about power. The conversation around people's right to marry or to access healthcare or to show up for partners if they're not in the legalized heteronormative structure, monogamous usually, married usually, that's about power, right? And this, I think the like major panic that may be springing up for a lot of people is like, oh fuck, like here's another thing now, like there was already Me Too, and I tried to start learning about that, and then life got in the way, and I got busy, and I had to work, and my boss was really intense, and you know, I got sick or whatever it is, like life is happening, and so now I have to worry about learning and not messing up in the LGBTQ 2+IA community. Or what's the acronym now? Am I going to get yelled at? Now I need to figure out the like whole Me Too movement and the gender violence conversation, and I can't make jokes that I used to make anymore because that's not okay. And now I need to learn about race and stuff, and it's like all of those things are offshoots from a core of power. If you look back clearly and hard enough, the challenging thing is that's gonna bring up a lot of shit for all of us in our lives of when we were in power and when we were powerless, because we've all been the neck and we've all been the boot. And I say that very specifically to evoke what has happened, and I take the risk of using that analogy right now because some people are going to be like, why did you fucking do that?
Yeah, but and speak to that Ralph Waldo Emerson quote that you had mentioned earlier about what do you speak.
Oh,
yeah, go ahead.
I think what you were saying about, you know, if you show up enough and are aligning with people and are constantly showing up to the places that feel imperfect and like, could we do this better, and just continue to show up and shut up and listen, what you do speak so loudly that I cannot hear what you say. And I think to your question of like, you know, what is performative allyship and what is being a real ally? We can never be real allies. We can just try to be the best human beings that we can. And if you do that consistently enough for long enough, you'll end up being allied to the struggles that you're not a part of and can help liberate yourself, first of all, by supporting parts of your community that are working hard to liberate themselves. No saviorism, cut the bullshit. None of us are absolved of our guilt and our, you know, our own things. But if we can get to not being ashamed and just being fucking embarrassed and be like, okay, now what? You know, I have been that person that I'm like, I'm an ally to Indigenous folks. That was not great. And I'm still doing things that are not great, you know, and I'm going to keep showing up and doing dumb things and trying to cause as little harm as possible and repair the harm in the ways that I am able to. If somebody says like, you just did a dumb, you know, instead of being like, you're a dumb. And if somebody says you're a dumb, it's my work to hear that as you did a dumb, because it's not my job then to tone police them and be like, can you be nicer to me when you're teaching me right now? But like, you know, can I be a white person whisperer? Maybe, because I've been the one that does the dumb and am in perfectionist mode and am in like, I just want to be good with everybody and I don't get to be good with everybody. That's hard.
This is such a good conversation. I'm so happy we did this.
Me too.
So, Humaira, how can people continue to follow you and your work?
DMs on Instagram, though I haven't posted on Instagram for 2 years, at Humaira Hamid, HUMAIRAHAMID. And then I have a Strikingly website, so humairahamid.strikingly.com. And people are like, you should get a website. You should do this. You should do that. And I'm like, if people are interested in finding me and being in touch, they will. And if it's too hard, then I'm not the person for that conversation.
Ooh.
Right now.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Humaira. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.